At Maison Orly, the kind of restaurant where even the air feels rehearsed, everything gleamed with control. The chandeliers dripped in crystal light, the linens were so crisp you could hear them snap if touched, and the waiters glided across the floor with a silence that belonged in a cathedral. The place was designed to intimidate, and Preston loved nothing more than holding court there. That night, the table stretched long enough to feel like a runway. 17 guests, all of them part of Preston's carefully curated empire, lawyers, financiers, spouses who glittered in diamonds that could blind you if they caught the light right. They weren't friends, not really. They were witnesses, an audience for the Preston Hale show. And I was meant to play my usual role, the quiet wife, seated beside him like another one of his tailored accessories. But this wasn't just another night. It was my birthday, my 35th. And I had allowed myself, foolishly, to believe that meant something. Preston leaned back in his chair, champagne glass in hand. He didn't sway, didn't stumble. His control was absolute, the way it always was when he performed in front of these people. His eyes, sharp, cold, and amused, settled on me with a finality that made my skin tighten. He didn't lower his voice. He didn't whisper. He projected, like an actor on stage. "Be grateful I even looked your way." The sentence cut through the air sharper than broken glass. Forks stopped halfway to mouths. Conversation died mid-laugh. The pianist in the corner fumbled, striking a note that jarred the silence before recovering. 17 people stared at me, and for one long, unbearable heartbeat, the only sound was the soft fizz of champagne in Preston's glass. I felt their judgment before I even met their eyes. Pity from some, amusement from others. To them, I was the prop who'd outlived her purpose. The small-town teacher he'd polished up and displayed until she dulled in comparison to the company he craved. And now, in front of them, he was dismantling me piece by piece. But here's what none of them expected. I smiled. Not the smile of a woman defeated. Not the smile of someone trying to mask her humiliation. No, it was quiet, deliberate, slow. The kind of smile that didn't belong in that moment, the kind that made Preston's eyes flicker, just for a split second, with something he couldn't quite hide. Unease. Why did I smile when the entire room expected me to shatter? Why did I look almost ready? The waiter appeared with precision, as if the timing had been rehearsed. A leather folder, thicker than most people's rent checks, slid onto the table in front of Preston. He didn't even open it. He set down his glass, pushed the folder toward me, and straightened his cufflinks. "You'll handle this," he said. And with those 4 words, he rose. His chair scraped against the marble floor, a sound so harsh it felt intentional. Every guest's eyes followed him as he buttoned his jacket, nodded once to the group, and turned toward the exit. I opened the folder with steady hands. Inside, the number stared back at me like a verdict. $3,987.42, rounded up, for $1,000. For $1,000 for a dinner I hadn't ordered, surrounded by people who pretended not to notice me. My birthday dinner turned into a public execution. The silence that followed was almost unbearable. Not one of those 17 guests reached for their wallet. Not one of them offered to split the bill. They stared at their phones, at their drinks, at the patterns on the tablecloth. Anything but me. I could feel the heat rise in my chest, but I refused to let it reach my face. I refused to give them the spectacle they wanted. So I reached into my purse and pulled out a credit card. Not the joint account Preston controlled. Not the one he monitored every statement of. No, this was mine. Hidden. Quiet. A card I had built carefully, piece by piece, in preparation for a night just like this. I laid it on top of the bill with calm that was anything but calm. The waiter, a young man with tired eyes but a spark of recognition, gave the faintest nod. He understood. He knew this wasn't weakness, it was control. Where did that card come from? How long had I been hiding it? I leaned back in my chair, the smile still curling at the corner of my mouth. While the others busied themselves with anything but me, I let my eyes drift upward. That's when I saw it. Above us, tucked discreetly into the ornate molding of the ceiling, was a black lens no bigger than a button. A surveillance camera, angled directly at our table. My gaze swept across the room, and I noticed something else, a mirrored art installation on the far wall, angled just right to reflect our entire section of the dining room. Most would dismiss it as decorative, but I knew better. Maison Orly prided itself on discretion, yes, but also on precision. That camera wasn't just for security. It was for record-keeping, for training, for the restaurant's private archive. Every word Preston had spat, every cruel look, every insult, it was all captured. And just like that, the humiliation transformed into something else entirely. Evidence. What exactly did that camera capture? Exit through the velvet rope. Preston's departure wasn't a simple exit. It was a performance. He strode toward the velvet rope with the grace of someone who believed the world revolved around him. His jacket, his smirk, his deliberate pace, they were all part of the show. And trailing behind him, as if on cue, was Sloane Whitaker. She called herself his consultant, but everyone in that room knew better. Her dress was cut sharp, her heels clicked against the marble like punctuation marks, and her smile was aimed at me with the satisfaction of a victor. She didn't need to say anything. Her presence said it all. The table buzzed again, relief spilling back into their laughter now that the scene was over. And as I gathered my purse, preparing to leave, the maitre d' appeared beside me. Laurent. Always composed, always untouchable, his face carved from professionalism. But tonight, for the briefest moment, something cracked in his expression. He leaned in, his hand brushing against mine, and slipped a small folded place card into my palm. No words, no explanation, just a subtle gesture before he walked away, mask firmly back in place. The card felt heavier than it should have, like it carried more than paper inside. Why did the maitre d' hand me a folded place card? You might be wondering why I stayed so calm, why I didn't scream or cry or throw the wine in Preston's face. But sometimes, the loudest power doesn't come from chaos. It comes from silence, from watching, from waiting, from knowing you've caught more than just words, you've caught proof. We caught more than insults that night. And what came after? That was the real show. What did the place card hide? 23 missed calls at 4:41 a.m. By the time the night bled into morning, my phone buzzed so violently it nearly fell from the nightstand. When I picked it up, the screen glared back with 23 missed calls. All from Preston. I pressed play on the voicemails, one after the other, listening as his carefully constructed mask cracked piece by piece. Nora, call me back. We need to talk about what happened tonight. Second message, irritation sharpening his voice. This isn't funny. You're embarrassing yourself. By the fifth, anger boiled over. Answer the damn phone. Do you understand what you've started? By the 10th, fear crept in. They're freezing accounts. Clients are calling. This is serious. By the 20th, panic took hold. His voice broke, frantic, unrecognizable. They came to the office. Agents. They took the computers. Nora, please, you don't know what you've done. But he was wrong. I knew exactly what I'd done. What detonated between midnight and dawn? The place card's ink. I unfolded the card beneath the soft yellow light of my bedside lamp. At first, it looked blank. Empty. A piece of paper slipped into my hand for reasons I couldn't yet understand. But I felt the weight of it, heavier than paper should ever be. So I reached for the tiny keychain light I always carried, the one with a UV beam. I swept it across the surface, and the invisible words revealed themselves in a faint purple glow. 9:30 a.m. And beneath it, 2 initials, CP. It wasn't a note. It was a summons. Who is CP? Think back to that dinner table. To the moment Preston thought he'd broken me. The room was silent, the insults hung in the air, the bill lay before me like a sentence carved in stone. Everyone waited for me to crumble. But instead, I smiled. I smiled because I wasn't the only one watching. I smiled because the humiliation wasn't the end, it was evidence. I smiled because Preston had made one fatal mistake. He believed he was untouchable. But what he didn't know, the trap had already been set. Was I the victim of an ambush, or was he walking into mine? The alarm clock screamed at 5:30 a.m., just like it had every morning for the last 2 years. I moved automatically, muscle memory guiding me through the steps Preston demanded. Grind the beans for exactly 14 seconds. Heat the water to 200 degrees. Warm the delicate porcelain cups before pouring. Every movement had been trained into me like a soldier learning drills. But this morning was different. I stood in our marble kitchen, the counters gleaming under cold light, and halfway through pouring the espresso I stopped. The dark stream hissed into the cup, half full, then died as I pulled the pot away. The smell of fresh coffee lingered sharp in the air. For the first time, I didn't finish the ritual. I left it incomplete. And in the silence of that cavernous kitchen, I realized something. This routine wasn't just about coffee. It was about control. He had trained me to serve him so precisely that even the smallest deviation would feel like rebellion. So I left the cup unfinished on the counter, the steam curling like smoke after a fire. What happens when I don't finish the ritual? By 7:15, I was pulling into the parking lot of Lincoln Elementary. The sight of that squat brick building always felt like stepping into another life. Inside, the walls were covered in multiplication charts, stick figure family drawings, and glitter that would never completely vacuum out of the carpet. The moment I walked in, 28 third graders erupted into cheers. "Happy birthday, Ms. Bennett." They chorused it in unison, their small hands waving cards made from construction paper. Not Mrs. Hale. Not Mrs. Preston. Ms. Bennett. That was my choice. My maiden name, written in block letters on the plate at my desk. Because here, I wasn't the humiliated wife at Maison Orly. Here, I was just a teacher, loved by children who didn't care about designer dresses or hedge funds. Sophia threw her arms around my waist. "We made you cards," she said proudly. Each one was messy, colorful, misspelled, and worth more than every diamond flashing at that dinner table the night before. Why did I choose Bennett here and Hale everywhere else? Because even before the restaurant, some part of me knew I had to keep a piece of myself separate. Why did I revert to my maiden name at school only? The memory still burned. The country club luncheon, all white linens and carefully placed roses. Beatrice Langford, draped in pearls, lifted her glass of burgundy, tilted it too quickly, and let it cascade across my thrifted dress. Gasps circled the table as if it had been an accident. But I saw the flicker in her eye, the satisfaction hiding in her apology. "Oh no, your sweet little dress," she said, pressing napkins against me with just enough force to grind the stain in deeper. Laughter whispered from behind manicured hands. I fled to the bathroom, scrubbing at the fabric until the stains spread like blood. And as I sat there in the harsh light, I overheard voices through the door. "Poor thing," Beatrice said, her voice dripping with mock pity. Preston really did marry his charity case. The women laughed, sharp and cruel. But someone else was there too. Someone who caught the whole scene on their phone, quietly recording. Who filmed that accident? 2 days before my birthday, my doorbell rang. When I opened it, a woman swept inside with the air of a general. Odette Marlowe, celebrity stylist. Behind her trailed 2 assistants wheeling racks of clothes and a makeup case the size of a trunk. "Mrs. Hale," she said, eyeing me like merchandise. "Your mother-in-law insisted you be properly prepared." They circled me like predators, clipping fabric against my body, muttering judgments under their breath. Too soft here. Too harsh there. They spoke as though I wasn't even present, just raw material to be reshaped. Lip fillers would balance your face. Subtle work around the eyes. Foundation garments can fix the rest. I stood there, stripped down to a mannequin, while they debated my worth in dollars and stitches. But as Odette packed up, She slipped one comment that snagged my attention. Invoice goes directly to Mr. Hale's office, as always. Always. Who paid them, Preston or someone else in his orbit? Have you ever been managed by someone who claimed to love you? Someone who turned your body, your voice, your choices into assets they could refine, like a business investment? Where's your line? Because mine had been crossed long before Maison Orly. Where's my line, and when would I finally draw it? 2 weeks before the dinner, Preston called me from the airport. Toronto meeting, he said. Back Thursday. He spoke with the flat certainty of someone who never expected to be questioned. But when I emptied his jacket pocket for the dry cleaner, a receipt fluttered out. Mayfair, London. Date stamped the same day. A midnight charge for oysters and champagne. Toronto and London, the same night. 2 cities, 2 stories. Why did he need 2 versions of the truth? Why 2 cities in the same hours? That night at Maison Orly, I thought I'd left my smartwatch at home. But when I plugged it in the next morning, the screen lit up with an icon I'd never seen before. A red dot pulsing in the corner. I tapped it. The watch had recorded. Not the steps I took, not the calories I burned, but the conversation. A silent, automatic recording triggered by background noise. And what it captured wasn't just Preston's words. It caught the whispers after he left. The sharp laughter, the cruel comments, the admission of things they never thought I'd hear. What did the room mic miss that my watch caught? Later, in the quiet of our bedroom, I scrolled through his bank statements on my phone. Transfers labeled Heritage Pillar Trust appeared again and again. Small enough not to trigger alarms. Frequent enough to matter. 3 jurisdictions. 3 continents. And always the same quiet bleed of money moving through the system. Heritage Pillar Trust. It sounded respectable, almost noble. But digging deeper, I found connections. Senior accounts. Retirees. People who had entrusted Preston's firm with everything they owned. Was he funding his life, our life, by draining the savings of people who wouldn't live long enough to notice? Were retirees in Sydney footing his lifestyle? The initials on the place card burned into my mind, CP. At exactly 9:30 a.m., I walked into a coffee shop downtown, the kind where baristas wear denim aprons and every order comes with latte art. She was waiting for me at a corner table, Tessa Monroe, a forensic accountant with a reputation for uncovering financial crimes powerful men swore were invisible. Her eyes were sharp, the kind of sharp that made you feel like she could dissect your life before you even sat down. I slid the place card across the table. She held it under the light, nodded once, and said, Caroline Pierce, custodian. She handles the Heritage Pillar Trust transfers. Then she pulled out a laptop and spread bank statements like puzzle pieces. Her fingers flew across the keyboard as numbers filled the screen. Look here, she said, circling transactions. $1,250, $980, $1,100. Always below the threshold that triggers a compliance alert, but repeated over and over. Small enough to disappear, large enough to build a fortune if you skim long enough. On her screen, the pattern unfolded like a trail of breadcrumbs. Each transaction looked harmless, but together they painted a picture of theft hiding in plain sight. Someone's been draining these accounts, she said quietly. And it isn't by accident. I felt my pulse quicken. Each dollar amount was another thread in a web Preston thought I'd never see. Who is CP? Tessa's answer was clear. Caroline Pierce, custodian of the trust. But if Caroline held the keys, what role did Preston play? I knew I couldn't fight this alone. That's why I reached out to Omar Halim, an investigative reporter known for chasing stories so dangerous they left scars. He met me at a diner that smelled of grease and strong coffee, the kind of place where secrets could be spilled unnoticed. He leaned across the table, voice low. I've had a lead on Preston's firm for months. Whispered tips, rumors of offshore accounts. But no one would talk, and I couldn't get proof. I slid a flash drive across to him. You have it now. He plugged it into his laptop, and as files appeared, I watched his expression shift from curiosity to shock. "This is everything," he whispered. Transaction records, shell accounts, even his signature on transfers. But then he paused, his brow furrowing. "There's one thing missing. One document that ties all of this directly to him. Without it, he can argue it's rogue employees, a mistake, anything but his hand. I need the custodian log. The official authorization that proves he ordered the movement of funds." The custodian. Caroline Pierce again. Her name had surfaced twice now, but her role wasn't clear. What's the one document Omar still needed? The custodian log, Caroline's record. When I returned to Maison Orly under the cover of afternoon quiet, Laurent, the maitre d', was waiting. His mask of formality had cracked slightly, his shoulders seemed heavier, his eyes shadowed. "I shouldn't do this," he murmured, leading me into a back office. He unlocked a drawer and pulled out a sleek black drive. "We archive table feeds for training, but I kept a copy of your dinner." He hesitated, then looked me straight in the eye. "Not for the restaurant. For me. I've seen Preston destroy too many people in this room. I couldn't stand the thought of that night disappearing into the vault." He clicked the file open. Crystal clear video filled the screen. Preston's sneer, his words, my smile, it was all there. And more, the laughter after he left, the whispers of his friends mocking me, Patricia's cruel remark about teachers being charity cases. Laurent's voice was steady. "The official archive will disappear if his lawyers ask. But this backup? They don't know it exists. Why did he keep a private backup? Not for policy, for conscience." All this time, I had focused on Sloane Whitaker, the woman who followed him out that night. But Tessa's files told a different story. Sloane wasn't the threat. She was a decoy. Her presence was flashy, obvious, meant to draw attention. The real danger was quieter, embedded deeper. Caroline Pierce, the custodian of the Heritage Pillar Trust, wasn't just an employee. She had a brother, Colton Pierce. A name that surfaced in Omar's notes tied to offshore accounts and shadow corporations. It wasn't Sloane who mattered. It was Colton. And as soon as his name appeared, the pieces shifted. What leverage did Colton think he had? This isn't just a scandal. It's a labyrinth, and every corner hides a new player, a new betrayal. I need you to stay with me, because the next twist will change everything. Don't miss the drop, subscribe before the next twist lands. What twist is waiting around the corner? Omar dug into one of Preston's charities, the Grace Harbor Foundation. On paper, it funded art programs for underprivileged youth. Press releases, glossy photos, smiling children holding paintbrushes. But when Tessa cross-checked the financials, the truth bled through. Grace Harbor wasn't buying easels or paint. It was wiring money to art logistics companies that, on closer look, were dealerships for vintage cars. Ferraris, Bentleys, Jaguars, vehicles bought under the guise of philanthropy. The receipts bore a single signature. Bold, familiar, arrogant. Whose signature authorized art logistics? Preston Hales. Among the receipts was one that made my breath catch. A jeweler's slip from Mayfair, London. Midnight pickup. Item: diamond bracelet. Purchased under an alias Preston had used before, Edward Harland. I called the jeweler, posing as his assistant. The man on the phone remembered the order clearly. "Oh yes," he said warmly. "Beautiful piece." But he didn't wear it. He gave it to her right there in the shop. A woman waiting upstairs. Who wore the bracelet in that Mayfair penthouse? Preston swore he'd been in Toronto for business that week. He even sent me photos, airport lounges, hotel lobbies, the usual props of his lies. But Omar got hold of CCTV from JFK. The footage was damning. Preston never boarded the flight. He walked into the terminal, made a call, then disappeared out a side exit. And yet, somehow, his passport was scanned at Pearson Airport in Toronto. If he never left New York, then who swiped his passport in Canada? I sat at my kitchen table long after midnight, papers scattered around me like wreckage after a storm. My eyes kept circling back to one page. An internal audit Preston had filed away in a locked drawer. Tessa had pried it out of the archives for me. In the margins, in red ink, were the words, "Variance, elder accounts." Circled. Dated 3 months ago. Someone had caught it. Someone had flagged the bleeding of funds from seniors' portfolios. The evidence had been right there, visible, undeniable. Yet the report was buried. No follow-up. No escalation. Just silence. Which begged the question, who had buried the audit? The answer came, not from the audit, but from Preston's own phone. Omar managed to crack a backup, and what we found stopped me cold. A text thread between Preston and a man named Damien Roth, a mentor figure from London. The kind of man whose name never appeared on official documents, but whose shadow stretched across continents. Optics matter more than outcomes, Damien had typed. Control the story, and numbers become background noise. But buried deeper in the thread was something stranger. Damien had warned him about a server. Milo. Deal with Milo before he talks. His memory is too sharp. His hands were too steady when he poured. He saw more than he should. Why would a mentor in the UK be worried about a server in New York? What did Milo know? I found Milo 2 nights later, working at a smaller bistro uptown. He recognized me instantly, his face tightening as though he wanted to apologize for something that wasn't his fault. I couldn't say anything then, he whispered, glancing around nervously. But I kept this. He pulled out his phone and showed me a photo. A wine glass shattered on the floor. Preston's reflection bent across the shards. His mouth mid-sentence, caught by accident in the curved surface. And if you tilted the photo just right, the words were visible in shape if not sound. She should be grateful. A reflection. A distorted, accidental confession. But still evidence. Could a reflection be admissible corroboration? That question would have to wait. The night of the dinner replayed in my mind endlessly. But it was Laurent, the maitre d', who gave me a detail I'd missed. Sloane hadn't left with Preston's car. She'd swapped valet claim tickets. What she handed to Colton Pierce wasn't for a car at all. Colton had walked away with a briefcase. Sleek, black, and heavy enough that he had to hold it with both hands. Not keys. Not leather seats. A container. And I couldn't stop asking, what was in the briefcase? We're in that briefcase next. And if you miss it, you'll miss everything, the whole spine of Preston's empire. Stay with me. Do we dare open it? Tessa and Omar opened it with gloved hands in Omar's office. The locks clicked, the lid lifted, and inside lay the truth in cold, precise order. A burner phone with numbers saved only as initials. A small ledger, handwritten, each line a transaction. Spare SIM cards wrapped in foil. And 4 stamped envelopes addressed to a Cayman Islands P.O. box. Each envelope heavy, stuffed with paper. We tore them open one by one. The first 3 contained cashier's checks, insurance against betrayal. But the fourth held copies of wire transfers with Preston's name scrawled at the bottom. His handwriting arrogant and unguarded. Which envelope nailed him? The 4th one, the transfers. That discovery triggered another. A number in the ledger, international, linked back to a family office in Sydney. I dialed. A woman answered, her voice quiet but resolute. She introduced herself only as Amelia, heiress to one of the trusts. We'll cooperate, she said without hesitation. Preston bled my grandfather's account dry. He was 84 and too proud to admit he didn't understand the statements. Preston charmed him, called him sir, told him stories of legacy. Meanwhile, he siphoned his life's savings into cars and penthouses. Her voice cracked. I'll testify. Whatever you need. What did Preston do to her grandfather's trust? He turned it into his private bank. The night after that call, I pulled my red dress from the dry cleaner's bag. It looked almost new, the wine stains finally lifted. But when I slipped it on, something caught against my skin. Inside the hem, stitched in tiny black letters, was a tag. Orly/17/Hale. The restaurant's name. The number of guests. Preston's surname. It wasn't just a dinner. It had been staged. Prearranged. Documented. The humiliation wasn't spontaneous. It was orchestrated from the seating chart to the stitching in my dress. Who had prearranged the table to capture every second of my humiliation? I had thought humiliation at a dinner table was the end of Preston's cruelty. But the truth was, that night had only been his opening act. What followed wasn't just betrayal in marriage, it was betrayal at a national scale, the kind that could topple reputations and shake governments. Tessa called me into her office one evening, the glow of 3 monitors lighting her face in stark shadows. She had replayed the Maison Orly footage over and over, combing through angles like a detective replaying a crime scene. "Look at this," she said, pointing to the mirrored art piece that hung on the far wall of the restaurant. "It's not just decoration, it's a bounce." In the reflection, she had triangulated the angle until we could see Sloane Whitaker, seated just behind Preston. Her lips moved, quick and deliberate, hidden beneath the noise of clinking glasses and laughter. Tessa froze the frame. She wasn't flirting. She was signaling. I leaned closer. With her training in lip reading, Tessa isolated the motion of the words. One word. Just one. Tender. It wasn't romance. It wasn't intimacy. It was business. Government contracts. Insider information traded like currency across champagne flutes. And suddenly, Preston's empire looked even darker. Who fed him the bid? The initials on that folded card, CP, had haunted me. But when I finally sat across from Caroline Pierce, custodian of the Heritage Pillar Trust, the picture sharpened. She was pale, exhausted, her hands trembling as she stirred a cup of tea she never drank. "I kept the books," she admitted. "I saw everything. But if I blew the whistle without protection, my entire team would be ruined. Innocent people, secretaries, analysts, they'd all go down with him." Her voice cracked. "I'll talk. I'll hand over the logs. But you need to promise me my people are safe." I nodded. And then I asked the question that had been burning since I learned her last name. "What about Colton? Your brother?" Her silence was answer enough. Was Colton already compromised? Omar worked like a man possessed. He knew the clock was ticking, that Preston's lawyers were circling. So he did what every seasoned journalist does when a story is too hot to hold. He fragmented it. He time-locked the files with 3 separate publishers in New York, London, and Toronto. Each one had a countdown, ready to release unless Omar manually stopped it every 24 hours. If they silence one outlet, he explained, his eyes bloodshot from lack of sleep, another will publish. If they try to freeze all 3, we still control the clock. He leaned back, tapping the space bar. The only question is, which outlet goes first? Which outlet will hit publish first? What you're about to hear is fragile. It could vanish with a single injunction, a single well-placed gag order. If you blink, it's gone. Don't miss the next beat. Subscribe so you're not left in the dark when the truth disappears. What happens if injunctions land before the clock strikes? And land they did. At dawn, Preston's barrister filed an urgent application in the High Court of London. I read the scanned order myself, the ink barely dry. Emergency injunction to prohibit dissemination of materials prejudicial to ongoing commercial negotiations. It was slick, couched in legalese, designed to strangle the story before it breathed. But Omar had anticipated this. "You think I didn't see UK jurisdiction coming," he said, a grin slicing through his exhaustion. "I filed counter-affidavits 2 days ago. They can gag London, but New York and Toronto? Out of reach." Did I anticipate UK jurisdiction? No, but Omar did. And he saved us. The first spark came from Toronto. A small paper, obscure, independent, posted an exposé linking the Grace Harbor Foundation to vintage car dealerships. The internet caught fire. It wasn't just the fraud. It was the donor names. Names Preston had leaned on for legitimacy. Names he thought were untouchable. The one that went viral was a shock, Evelyn Harcourt. A philanthropist beloved in Canada who had believed her money was funding children's art programs. Instead, it had purchased a 1967 Jaguar E-Type. Her statement was immediate. If Preston Hale touched 1 cent of my donations for personal gain, I will see him and prison myself. Which donor's name went viral? Evelyn Harcourt. That night, my phone buzzed with a call from a blocked number. I answered, and the voice on the other end was smooth, practiced British. Mrs. Hale? Or should I call you Bennett now? Let's discuss terms. It was Damien Roth, the mentor, the phantom behind Preston's plays. I can make this go away, he said. Hush money. Enough to keep you comfortable for life. Just step aside, let the men handle this, and it ends quietly. I set the phone on speaker, but what Damien didn't know was that my second device, tucked beneath the table, was recording. He spoke too much. Always too much. And in his arrogance, he slipped. Preston never understood discretion, Damien sighed. I warned him not to mix insider tender leaks with personal indulgences, but he couldn't resist. A man like that is useful until he's dangerous. And now, he's dangerous. My heart slammed in my chest. What did Damien just confess to without realizing it? That Preston had been fed government tenders. That this wasn't just financial fraud, it was insider trading, the kind of crime that pulled powerful men down like falling dominoes. And with Damien's voice recorded, the net tightened further. I always thought revenge would come with a single moment, a final blow. But what I learned is that real justice isn't a lightning strike. It's dominoes. One piece falling into the next until the whole structure collapses under its own weight. Preston had built his empire tall, arrogant, glittering. But now, piece by piece, it was beginning to tip. It started quietly, emails, not headlines. The SEC in the United States, the FCA in the UK, and ASIC in Australia began comparing notes. Small queries at first. Requests for clarification. Metadata trails. I was sitting in Omar's office when he pulled up the joint notice. Look at this, he said, tapping the screen. They're not working separately anymore. They're coordinating. And what tied them together wasn't Preston's signature on a contract or Caroline's custodian logs. It was an email header, metadata that revealed identical attachments had passed through 3 jurisdictions within hours of each other. One sender, one hub. The name on that metadata made my stomach tighten. Whose email linked them all? Damien Roth's. The mentor's fingerprints weren't in the shadows anymore. They were in black and white, burned into the record. Once the regulators lined up, the money was next. Heritage Pillar Trust, the golden artery that had fed Preston's lifestyle for years, suddenly pulsed red on every compliance system. I was at Tessa's apartment when the freeze hit. Her laptop chimed, alert after alert. Wire transfers flagged. Funds stopped mid-flight between accounts. Cayman to Zurich. Zurich to Sydney. Sydney to New York. Each transaction hung suspended, like birds shot midair. But one transfer clung on, resisting the system like a dying breath. Elder Relief Fund number 7. An account tied to a 91-year-old widower in Chicago who thought Preston was protecting his retirement. Look, Tessa whispered. This one's trembling. It hasn't failed yet. And then, with a single keystroke from an Australian regulator, the line went red. Frozen. What account trembled last? Elder Relief number 7. The ripple hit society faster than it hit courts. At the country club, Beatrice Langford, the same woman who had once accidentally spilled burgundy on my dress, called me. Her voice was sugar-coated, brittle at the edges. Nora, darling, perhaps I misjudged you. If you'd like, I'd be happy to write a character letter on your behalf. Judges do love community validation. I almost laughed. She wanted to launder her own complicity by painting herself as my ally. Thank you, I said softly, but no. Because a polite decline can sting more than any insult. Why did I refuse Beatrice's letter? Because her panic was the punishment. Then came Sloane Whitaker. For weeks she had been Preston's shadow, the woman at his side. But shadows shift when light moves. She reached out to Omar directly, sliding a folder across his desk. Inside were Preston's private speech drafts, the outlines he used to manipulate investors, charm clients, and humiliate me. One draft stopped me cold. It wasn't for a business dinner. It was for my birthday. At the bottom of the page, in his handwriting, was a line. "She'll pay for the lesson." Not metaphorical, not casual. Intent. Documented in ink. A line of proof that my humiliation hadn't been a slip of temper, it had been planned. Was this evidence of intent? Yes, and it was undeniable. So now I need you to weigh in. Guilty or not guilty? Drop it in the comments. And if you're still not subscribing, tell me why. Debate keeps this story alive, and your voice becomes part of it. But remember, once the debate starts, it can either fracture the truth or fortify it. Does the debate help, or does it harm? For weeks, I believed that bracelet from Mayfair was meant for Sloane. But when the jeweler confirmed who signed for it, the truth sliced through me. It wasn't Sloane. It was signed by Margaret Roth, Damien's spouse. That bracelet wasn't a token of romance. It was a currency of allegiance. Preston hadn't just taken favors, he had entangled himself inside Damien's own home. So if Margaret wore the bracelet, did that mean Damien's household was the leak? Was the rot inside his family all along? Colton Pierce, always one step in the shadows, made his move at midnight. Crypto wallets. A panic transfer designed to slip funds into anonymity before the regulators closed every door. But even blockchain leaves fingerprints. And when he tried to move the funds, the system stalled. Flagged. I asked Tessa how that was possible. Because the node he's trying to move through, she said, a small smile tugging her mouth, isn't anonymous anymore. The government seeded it. Who owned the node that blocked Colton? Not a stranger. Federal investigators. Colton had been trapped before he even logged in. And then Laurent returned. The maitre d' who had given me the video feed. He approached me in the early morning hush of Maison Orly, the restaurant empty, chairs stacked on tables. I didn't give you everything, he confessed. He led me into the back office and produced another drive. This is audio only. I recorded it myself as insurance. When I pressed play, Preston's voice filled the room. Not the polished tone he used for clients, but the raw rehearsal of cruelty. Make her pay the tab, he said, laughter forced, as though he were practicing humiliation like a script. She needs to learn her place. It wasn't just a slip at dinner. It was premeditated performance. Did the jurors hear Preston scripting my humiliation? They would. That was the moment I realized the dominoes weren't just falling, they were accelerating. Each piece toppled into the next with unstoppable force. Preston's empire wasn't being dismantled by a single blow. It was collapsing under the weight of its own arrogance, every hidden cruelty recorded, every theft exposed, every ally turning into evidence. And the last domino? That one hadn't fallen yet, but I could see it trembling. The first time I sat across from Preston at a table, it was my birthday, and he used it to dismantle me in front of 17 strangers. This time, the table was different. The stakes weren't champagne and impressions. They were survival. His. Mine. Ours. The conference room smelled faintly of lemon polish and ink. Fluorescent lights hummed above us. My counsel, Claire Whitmore, slid a leather folder across the glossy surface. Inside wasn't a dinner bill. It was a ledger. Preston didn't look at me. He stared at Claire, his jaw locked. His hands were steady, but his eyes betrayed the storm he thought he was hiding. This ledger, Claire said evenly, records every transfer through Heritage Pillar. And this, she tapped a circled entry, links directly to Elder Relief Fund number 7. A breach not just of trust, but of fiduciary duty. Preston flinched. For years, he had lived behind the shield of his ironclad prenup, the clause he thought guaranteed me nothing. But Claire had found the rod in the steel. What clause voids his shield? She asked quietly, almost as if speaking to herself. The integrity clause. Not moral turpitude. Not adultery. Fiduciary breach. You signed away your own protection the moment you touched those accounts. The room held its breath. Would he sign the settlement or risk criminal discovery? I watched the color drain from Preston's face as Claire read the exact wording aloud. Any violation of fiduciary integrity, defined as misappropriation, diversion, or concealment of client funds, renders spousal protections null and void. His own lawyer tried to object, but Claire cut him down with a single page of the trust agreement, his signature at the bottom, bold and smug. Preston's shield wasn't just cracked. It was gone. If he signed the papers, he'd bleed assets. If he didn't, criminal investigators would peel him open like an autopsy. Which choice would he make? His pen scratched against the page, each stroke slower than the last. His arrogance, his armor, his certainty, it all collapsed into ink. He signed. But even as he did, Omar's timer hit 0. 3 synchronized releases detonated across the internet. New York, London, Toronto. Headlines roared to life, each one louder than the last. Which trended first? Toronto. Charity cars for children bought Preston hail his Jaguar. Within hours, the hashtag Jaguar Justice spread like wildfire. He had signed his name into surrender at the same moment his empire caught fire. The next morning, my phone rang. It was a radio station in Sydney. They were broadcasting live. A young woman's voice cracked through static. I'm calling because my grandfather's account was one of the elder relief funds. He trusted Preston Hale. He believed the brochures. Without you, we'd never have known. Thank you, Ms. Bennett. Thank you for giving us back his dignity. For a moment, I couldn't speak. The words stuck in my throat. Then I found my voice. There is one thing I want in return, I said slowly. Promise me you'll tell his story. Loudly. So no one else believes men like Preston are untouchable. The silence that followed was heavy. Then applause. Listeners across Australia heard it, and the ripple spread. When I walked back into my 3rd grade classroom, the children had strung a banner across the doorway. Welcome back, Miss Bennett. It wasn't store-bought. It was construction paper and glitter, letters uneven, taped together with love. I stood there longer than I meant to, my throat tight, my heart full. But when I turned, I saw him. Milo, the server from Maison Orly, standing outside the classroom door, hat in hand, eyes heavy with something unsaid. Why was Milo waiting? He handed me an envelope. Inside was a hand-sketched seating chart. Orly/17/Hale. The same inscription that had been hidden in the hem of my dress. But here, arrows circled certain seats, pointing toward me, toward Preston, toward the mirrored art piece. Someone had designed my humiliation as if it were theater. The question wasn't what this was. It was who drew the arrows. Was it Laurent, the maitre d' who tried to save me? Or Preston himself, rehearsing my humiliation like a play? And now I have to tell you, this isn't the end. Only subscribers get part 2. Don't be the one left behind. Subscribe now. But here's the real cliffhanger. Is there even a part 2? Or is this just the beginning of something bigger? Cornered animals thrash hardest. Preston wasn't done. He sent word through his attorney. If I didn't stop feeding documents to Omar, he'd smear me. He'd claim I had falsified grades, misused funds, that my teaching license was corrupt. He wanted to strip me of the one identity he hadn't yet touched, Ms. Bennett, teacher. But when his threat reached the district office, the response was swift. Who answered? Not me. The superintendent. The statement hit local news that afternoon. We stand with Ms. Bennett, it read. Her record is exemplary. Any claims otherwise are without merit. She is valued, trusted, and supported. Our teachers deserve protection, not persecution. And then the flood came. Parents. They posted photos of their children holding handmade signs. Ms. Bennett is our hero. She taught me to read. She believes in us. Which post went viral? A boy named Ethan, grinning wide, holding a cardboard sign that read, Ms. Bennett saved me. Now we save her. By the end of the week, Preston tried to return to Maison Orly. Laurent met him at the door. But above Lauren's shoulder, framed on the wall, was a notice. Heavy gold trim, bold black letters. This establishment does not serve cruelty. Preston Hale is banned for life. Guests stopped to read it, snapping photos, posting them online. It wasn't just banishment. It was public execution of his reputation. And the title of that notice? Conduct Unbecoming. I went home and unwrapped the dry-cleaned red dress one last time. I slid it over my shoulders, felt the weight of its fabric, and ran my fingers along the hidden tag. Orly/17/Hale. It wasn't just evidence of my humiliation. It was a blueprint. Proof of intent. And when I handed it to Claire, she smiled thinly. "This isn't just your case anymore," she said. "This tag helps crack another one." Damien's firm staged a nearly identical dinner 2 years ago. Different woman. Same stitch. Same pattern. The revenge wasn't mine alone anymore. It was spreading. We protect our own here at Pure Revenge Stories. Subscribe now, because if you miss one twist, you lose the whole truth. And if you're still not subscribing, comment why. Prove us wrong. Because the real question isn't whether Preston fell. The question is, which revenge tale do we unmask next?